I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference for allowing me to record the presentation. I wasn't able to travel to St. Petersburg this week. So I'm going to be talking about the logic of traditional worldviews and how that relates to the promotion of social norms in northern Siberia. First, I'd like to talk briefly about a problem, I think, that many have recognized in Western ontology, and that is the separation of human systems and natural systems only to have to be reintegrated through science. And this diagram comes from the National Science Foundation's call for proposals on the dynamics of coupled natural and human systems. This is a Cartesian view of reality, and many have identified the problems with it. Tim Ingold, in The Perception of the Environment, identifies this problem. One way of dealing with the problem of the Cartesian ontology in Western science is an approach called perspectivism. So my comment about this particular project is that it is a lot about categorization and breaking down categories. For example, the chapter on the animism versus totemism debate, and it's less about understanding the operation of these traditional ideas in the daily social life of the people in the regions. An alternative approach that I argue does focus more on the operation of these concepts is what Tim Ingold calls a developmental relational approach, and my efforts have been recently geared towards operationalizing this developmental relational approach. This approach is processual, that is, it's focused on the continual unfolding of social norms in a matrix of relationships. The approach is about communication, and it's about the communication of people that we can observe as anthropologists, and the people themselves can observe the communication. And it's not so concerned with justifications for various typologies or breaking down typologies, which are abstract disciplinary concepts. The approach has the potential to be highly quantitative or highly qualitative, and this approach has the potential to be very cross-cultural. It can be used to address problems that people are facing in the world, such as sustainability and land claims and indigenous rights, etc. A quote from Tim Ingold's Perception of the Environment illustrates a description of how this kind of approach would work. From my work with the Dolgan and Nagana-san, some examples here, and a number of these examples are highlighted in a chapter that I wrote for a book that just came out, edited by David Anderson, Rob Wishart, and Virginia Vate, called About the Hearth, Perspectives on the Home, Hearth, and Household in the Circumpolar North, published by Berghan. So I worked with the Dolgan and Nagana-san up in Taimyr since 1993, and some of the concepts and stories and narratives that I'll talk about today have been, they exemplify this relational thinking that Tim Ingold talks about. An important concept for both the Dolgan and Nagana-san is translated into Russian as grech, and there are different terms in those languages. The Nagana-san term is nunkareka, and the Dolgan term is ani. And so I'll just use the Russian term, grech, because that's what they use when they're communicating to me. Who determines what is and what is not grech, and how is this concept used in the community is really important for illustrating this relational developmental approach. So at this point, I'll give an example from Galina Grachova's ethnography with the Nagana-san back published in 1983. She talks about the traditional Nagana-san funeral procession, and the image here is a watercolor from the Nagana-san artist Myatymyako Turdogan, who I had the lucky chance of meeting back in 1993. So the traditional Nagana-san funeral procession includes building a small hearth fire to make tea and to have one final conversation with the dead. The fire is put out with snow or sand, or left to die out on its own. It's necessary to do this in this way so that there would be no fire or even any smoke when the funeral party departs, as conversations with the dead occur through fire. Additionally, for someone to look back at the funeral party as the funeral party departed, it's forbidden. And so the youth leave, and then the elders leave, and no one can look back. Grachova's informant told her on different occasions, "He has gone to the north. If you turn around, you will also turn after him in the direction of the tundra." And a second time, the informant said, "It's impossible to do. To look back is taboo. It's a sin. Otherwise, the dead will grab you." So I'll make an argument that such statements make sense partly in terms of letting go of the dead, but also partly because they're showing respect to the elders. Also, very importantly, the hearth fire is powerfully transformative for both Dolgons and Naganosans. The hearth fire allows people to speak to the dead, allows the dead to speak to the living, and it's a locus for social relationships. The dead influencing the living and the living influence the dead is probably the necessary element for what we conceive of as ancestor reverence. I want to talk about two different kinds of syllogisms. Syllogisms are a kind of logical argument in which a conclusion is inferred from two or more other propositions. And I'll contrast two types of syllogism, one deduction that everyone should be familiar with, and one abduction that's not quite so familiar. Deduction, and the example coming from Charles Sanders Peirce, American philosopher of the 19th century. A container is filled with red balls. A ball is taken from the container, therefore the ball is red. And this is a conclusion that's necessarily true. With abduction, you start off with the same rule, a container is filled with red balls, and then you have a red ball. Therefore, the conclusion is that the ball is taken from the container. This conclusion isn't necessarily true, because the ball could have come from elsewhere. But it's a very reasonable guess. And it's more like the ball is as if it's from the container, or it's like the ball came from the container, which is a simile. So abduction is more like hypothesis formation. So an example from Ustavam would be, when people die, it's not just because they're sick. People die because someone, either they themselves or someone else, broke the law of the tundra, and I'll talk a little bit more about the law of the tundra if I have time. So you have this law of the tundra. A person dies is the result. Therefore, someone broke the law of the tundra. The conclusion is not necessarily true. When someone dies, there's a village-wide discourse about the true cause of the person's death, and it takes the general form of abduction. Acts that people do to show respect to spirits of the tundra, as well as communications that take the form of abductions, have a significant social effect that I'll talk about in a second. So, communicating and accepting abductions unskeptically indeed communicates the acceptance of the communicator's authority and the acceptor's willingness to be influenced. So you have individuals communicating and other individuals accepting through various acts or communications that they are accepting that communication. Real quick example, one time in Ustavam, a couple of elderly Naganosan ladies did a seance in which I participated, where they contacted the spirits to predict my future. When they made some statements that came from the spirits that they had contacted, I was given a special stick in which I was instructed to hit the edge of the drum if it was true. And so I hit the edge of the drum, accepting the willingness, exemplifying my willingness to accept the authority of these very nice Nagano-san ladies. So viewing this as a process of communication and acceptance emphasizes the fact that these communications occur within social networks. And when abductions are accepted, the line between virtuous and unvirtuous is drawn, and the line between in-group and out-group as well. So the relational approach is a new way to look at collective action problems, and collective action problems are basically problems of individual defection on some kind of cooperative arrangement. Some of the things that have been identified by institutional economists about collective action problems are that with regard to common pool resources, users must monitor each other's behavior, and they must be able to sanction or exclude those users who do not provision the communal resource in the long run. So there's an individual defection problem, and there is a time discounting problem. Also, there is positive support for fairness in resource access and distribution for these common pool resources. So here's an example from just an everyday situation in the community where a hunter brings home a caribou and distributes portions to other people in the community. And this is part of treating the animal properly. And so respect for the Hazayani Tundri is demonstrated through various actions, such as putting a portion of the caribou bone marrow or oftentimes vodka in the hearth fire, as well as the acceptance of communicated metaphors, such as it's a sin or grech to hit the head of a burbot caught on a lake, but it's not a sin to hit the head of a burbot caught on a river. Accepting these metaphors unskeptically shows a person's willingness to accept the influence of the speaker, usually an elder, and to restrain individual appetites and to encourage social moral behavior. Not accepting these metaphors puts a person outside of the social network of the speaker and may have effects regarding access to resources. So someone might not be invited back to a hunting and fishing ground if they don't treat the animals properly, if they don't accept the metaphors. And oftentimes what happens is someone is identified as not treating the animals properly, and then there's bad hunting luck or bad fishing luck, and so that is then connected back to the individual not treating the animals properly through this process of abduction that I talked about earlier. So elders, and those are usually the people doing the monitoring and the sanctioning in the community, they reduce conflict and encourage cooperation by referencing these spirits of the tundra. Things that occur in people's daily lives are often viewed as the positive or negative consequences of following or not following the law of the tundra. In other words, spirits, the Hazyayani, cause things in the world to happen, and the elders don't have to. So that the elders don't have to take direct action against individuals. And if elders did do that, they'd be demonstrating the behavior that they're trying to discourage. In conclusion, I'd just like to reemphasize that human existence is not operating on two different levels, the societal and the ecological. Rather, a relational developmental approach can be used to understand traditional communications and their role in unfolding social norms and property concepts. Traditional wisdom is about creating social relationships and not some defunct knowledge or defective thinking. Would like to make a quick plug for Siberica. I am the managing editor of Siberica, published by Berghahn Journals, and we are looking for submissions from any area of Siberian studies. Please take us into consideration. We have a pretty fast turnaround for publications. Thanks to everybody, and have a great conference.